Tristan Reed wasn't the type of man who stood in line, especially not at a shipping center with flickering lights and the faint scent of printer ink, but that Monday morning, fate shoved him straight into one. He hadn't meant to be there. His assistant had handed him a slip, said a package meant for his apartment had been misdelivered to some off-brand local parcel shop on East 42nd. The moment he stepped inside, he regretted not sending someone else. Next, a voice called out, chipper and distracted at the same time. Tristan looked up from his phone and froze. She stood behind the counter in a plain navy shirt that clung to her like it was made for her, a name tag that Reed Elara pinned just above the curve of her heart. Her hair was twisted into a messy bun with a pencil shoved through it, and despite the chaos around her, she was smiling, actually smiling at the next person in line like they were the only one on the planet. He took a step forward. "I'm here for a package." It was misdelivered. Name, her eyes flicked up, and that was the moment. The moment something shifted in the air. Tristan Reed, her pen paused mid-air. "As in, Reed Enterprises?" "Yeah," he said, not really in the mood to explain the billion-dollar company he ran. "Package says it was sent here by mistake." She nodded, disappearing behind the counter, calling over her shoulder. "Most people in suits make their assistants do this part." He raised a brow. "Most people in suits have assistants who mess things up." She laughed, and he felt it in his chest. That was new. When she returned, she held a medium-sized box with his name scribbled across it in thick marker. "Here you go. Hope whatever's inside was worth the trip." He took it, but didn't move. "You always this cheerful at 9 in the morning," she leaned on the counter. "Only when the customer doesn't yell at me about shipping fees." Tristan chuckled. "Noted." He should have walked out then. He really should have. Instead, he asked, "You get a lunch break?" Elara blinked. "Is that your way of asking me out? Is that your way of saying yes?" She tilted her head, curious. "You're serious?" Dead, she glanced at the growing line behind him and sighed. "I get 30 minutes, starts at noon. I'll be back." "Sure you will, mister." Reed? She didn't expect him to show. In fact, she was convinced he'd been joking. No billionaire-looking guy in a $2,000 jacket and Italian boots asked out the girl behind the counter. That was not how the world worked, but at 12 sharp he returned. He brought a sandwich from a nearby deli and 2 coffees. They sat on the curb outside the shop, passing bites between each other, laughing about how awful the city smelled in the summer. She liked that he didn't talk about money. He asked about her favorite book, her worst customer story, and how many siblings she had. He liked that she didn't care about his last name. When the 30 minutes were up, she stood and dusted off her jeans. "Thanks for the sandwich. Thanks for saying yes." She hesitated, then added, "If you ever get another misdelivered package, I'll be here." He smiled. "I hope I do." He left then, tucking her laugh into his memory like a secret. For the rest of the day, nothing could shake the thought of her out of his mind. Not the back-to-back meetings, not the boardroom full of investors, not even the gala he was supposed to attend that night. And by the time Friday rolled around, he found himself walking back into the shop with a flat box tucked under his arm. Elara looked up, surprised. "Forget something?" "I actually did," he said, setting the box on the counter. "Turns out I got the wrong parcel Monday." "This one's yours," she stared at him. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Open it." Inside was a sketchbook, a very expensive one, and a box of graphite pencils, the exact set she'd mentioned she couldn't afford during their lunch. "I remembered," he said quietly. Her voice caught as she looked up. "Why?" He leaned a little closer. "Because I wanted to see what you draw." Elara stared at him like he'd just rewritten the rules of the universe, and maybe he had. Because from that moment on, Tristan Reed, the man who never waited in lines, or ate sandwiches on sidewalks, or gave a damn about random packages, started showing up at the parcel shop every week, with coffee, with stories, with questions that made her laugh and answers that made her blush. The woman behind the counter had somehow slipped under his skin, and he didn't want her to leave. Elara didn't see him for 12 days, not that she was counting. Not that she noticed the way her eyes flicked to the door every time the bell above it jingled. Not that it mattered. But when he finally appeared again, this time in a dark, collarless coat, and with a tension in his jaw she hadn't seen before, he didn't bring coffee or a carefully chosen gift. He brought silence. "You look like someone just told you espresso's been outlawed," she said, reaching for a clipboard without looking at him. He didn't laugh. Instead, he watched her, his voice low. "Can you get away for a bit?" Her hand froze over the form. Now, Tristan, I'm working." "I can't just—" "You can," he said, softer this time. "It's important." She narrowed her eyes but nodded toward the back. 5 minutes. He didn't wait for her to grab a coat. He just opened the door and led her out into the alley beside the shop where the noise of the street faded. She crossed her arms, shivering slightly. "What's going on?" "I need your opinion on something," he said, pulling his phone from his coat. "Couldn't that wait until I'm not on the clock?" "Not this." He tapped a few times, then handed it to her. The screen showed a photo of a sprawling rooftop, terracotta planters, string lights, and a wide open sky. "I'm building a space like this on top of my building. I want it to feel alive, not corporate. I thought you might understand what that means." She stared at the image, confused. "You hauled me out here for landscaping advice?" "No," he said. "I hauled you out here because I trust the way you see things." That stopped her. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She handed the phone back, but her fingers brushed his. "You're acting different." He looked up at the gray clouds. "My father's stepping down from the board. The press got wind of it. The shareholders are panicking." "Is that a bad thing?" "It's complicated." "Well," she said, leaning against the brick wall, "you don't look like someone who wants to run." "I don't." He paused. "But I might have to." Elara studied him. "So you came here instead of your office?" "I came here because it's the only place I don't feel like I'm already losing." His honesty caught her off guard. Not because it was raw, but because it was real. It wasn't the answer someone gave when they were trying to impress you. It was the truth, stripped bare. "I think the rooftop should have wildflowers," she said suddenly. "Something that doesn't try too hard, something that grows where it's planted." He looked at her then like she'd just solved a puzzle he hadn't realized he was stuck on. Back inside, she returned to the counter without another word, and he left without asking for anything else. But the next morning, a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper sat waiting at her station when she opened the shop. No note, just the flowers. 3 days later, he came back, but not alone. Elara glanced up as the door chimed, and her breath hitched. A woman in her 60s followed him in, wearing a crisp scarf and heels that didn't belong on the cracked tile floor. Her eyes swept the shop like she was confirming how beneath her it really was. "Elara," Tristan said, his expression unreadable. "This is my mother, Celia Reed." The older woman extended a hand, perfectly manicured. "So you're the girl from the Parcel shop." Elara shook it slowly. "And you're the woman who raised the man who doesn't know how to use a mailbox." Celia blinked once, then gave a short, amused laugh. "Charming." Tristan cleared his throat. "She's the one I told you about." "Elara," Celia said, turning her attention back. "What do you do?" "When you're not managing shipments?" "I sketch," Elara said, not missing the slight downward tilt of Celia's mouth. "Mostly cityscapes. Sometimes people who pretend they're buildings." Tristan stifled a cough. Celia nodded. "How lovely, and have you had any formal training?" "No," Elara replied. "But I've had a lot of practice being underestimated." The silence stretched. Finally, Celia turned to her son. "We'll speak later." She stepped out without another word. Tristan stayed behind, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't expect her to show up today." "She surprised me." "She didn't like me," Elara said plainly. "She doesn't like most people." "That's convenient." He looked tired. "She thinks I should be with someone who understands the world I live in. And I don't. I think you understand it better than anyone I've met." She didn't answer. Not because she didn't believe him, but because the way he said it made something shift inside her, something she wasn't ready to name yet. That night, she stayed late to close up. And when she stepped outside, he was waiting across the street, leaning against a sleek black car, hands in his coat pockets. Not saying anything, just waiting, Elara walked toward him slowly. "You really don't know when to quit," she said. "I know exactly when to quit," he replied. "I just haven't found the reason to yet." She looked up at him, her voice barely above the wind. "And what if you never do? Then I'll keep coming back." This time, she didn't stop him when he reached for her hand. Elara hadn't planned on seeing Tristan again that week. After the run-in with his mother, she'd told herself firmly that she needed to reset, rethink, return to her usual rhythm. She'd even stayed late 2 nights in a row sketching after close, trying to convince herself that what was happening between them was temporary, a distraction. A man like Tristan Reed didn't belong in her world, and she certainly didn't belong in his. But Thursday afternoon, a courier delivered an envelope addressed simply to her first name. Inside was an invitation. She turned it over in her hands, her heart thudding faster the longer she stared at the embossed gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to the Reed Foundation Benefit Gala," it read. "Black tie, Friday evening, 7 o'clock, the Whitmore Hotel." There was no note, no explanation. Just the invitation and a small card that read, "Your name is already on the list." She almost threw it out. Instead, she spent an hour pacing her apartment, then another hour texting her roommate to borrow a dress. She didn't own anything remotely close to black tie. Eventually, she settled on a long navy gown with a modest slit and simple straps, nothing flashy, but elegant enough to not stand out for the wrong reasons. The Whitmore was the kind of place she'd passed 100 times but never entered. Polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a lobby that smelled faintly of roses and money. When she gave her name at the door, the woman holding the clipboard smiled and waved her through without hesitation. Inside, it was like stepping onto a movie set. Waiters in white jackets wove between guests carrying trays of champagne. A string quartet played near the grand staircase, and the people, every last one of them, looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Elara took a slow breath and moved toward the edge of the room, pretending to study a floral arrangement. "You showed up," a voice said behind her. She turned to find Tristan, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo that made him look even taller, sharper. His tie was slightly loosened, like he'd already grown tired of the formality. "I wasn't going to," she admitted. "But then I figured, if your mother's going to scowl at me again, I might as well do it in a floor-length gown." His expression didn't change. "She's not here." "Oh, I didn't invite her," she raised an eyebrow. "You're not worried about appearances?" "I already brought someone who's going to raise eyebrows," he said, eyes locked on hers. She swallowed. "Why me, Tristan?" He didn't flinch. "Because you're the only person in this room who doesn't want anything from me." "That can't be true," she said. "You're a billionaire. People probably want things you haven't even invented yet." He leaned in slightly. "And yet you never ask me for anything." "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I know, that's why I wanted you here." Before she could respond, a man with silver hair and a sharp jawline approached, clapping Tristan on the shoulder. "There you are." "I've been dodging your CFO for 20 minutes. Tristan straightened. "Elara, this is Grant Mercer. He sits on the board." "Ah," Grant said, eyes flicking to her. "You're not from the office?" "No," she replied. "I'm from the real world." Grant laughed, clearly amused. "Well said." Tristan excused them gently, guiding Elara toward the far side of the room where the crowd thinned near the windows. The skyline glittered beyond the glass, 1,000 lights blinking in the dark. He pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it out. A small leather-bound sketchbook. "I saw this at a gallery downtown," he said. "Thought of you." Her fingers brushed his as she took it. "You're always giving me things. I'm not trying to buy anything." "I know." She hesitated. "But I don't want to be your weakness." "You're not." "Then what am I?" He stepped closer, voice low. "You're the only thing in my life that feels real right now." A hush settled between them, thick and fragile. She looked down at the sketchbook, then back up. "You don't even know what you're asking." "I'm not asking." "Then what is this?" he took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. This is me saying I don't care what my mother thinks, I don't care if you're not from my world. I care about what happens when you look at me like I'm not made of steel. She opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, the room shifted. A voice crackled over the speakers, announcing the start of the official remarks. Tristan sighed. I have to speak, he said, but stay. Please, she nodded slowly. He released her hand with reluctance, then stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom. The lights dimmed slightly and the crowd quieted. Elara moved to the side, sketchbook clutched in one hand, her other trailing over the fabric of her dress as if grounding herself. She watched him speak confident, clear, commanding the attention of the room without demanding it. His presence was undeniable. But what struck her more was the way he glanced toward her halfway through, like he needed to see her face to remember why he was even up there. Later, as the applause faded and guests began to drift toward the bar, she slipped out the side door into the quiet hallway beyond. She wasn't ready for what this could become, but when she stepped outside, he was already waiting by the valet stand, coat draped over one arm. I thought you'd left, she said. I was about to come find you. You didn't need to. I wanted to. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't belong in that room, Tristan. You belong wherever you want to be. And if I don't want to be someone's secret, then I'll make sure the whole city knows. She blinked, caught off guard. He reached for her hand. Come with me, just for tonight, no expectations, no headlines. Just you and me. She hesitated, then finally nodded. And as the driver opened the door to the sleek black car, Elara stepped inside not because she was chasing a fantasy, but because, for the first time, it felt like something real was chasing her back. The elevator doors opened directly into a penthouse that didn't just scream wealth, it whispered it, seductively. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a painting in motion, and a fireplace flickered beneath a marble mantel carved with precise lines. But Elara didn't look at any of it. Not at first, she looked at him. Tristan tossed his keys on a side table and pulled off his cufflinks, his movements slower than usual. I wasn't sure you'd come. Elara stepped further in, her fingers brushing the edge of a curved velvet sofa. Neither was I. He leaned against the kitchen island, watching her carefully. Do you want to change out of that dress? I have some things here. From the gallery boutique you mentioned, actually. I asked them to pick out what they thought you'd like. Her brow lifted. You bought me clothes I didn't ask for? I bought them in case you ever needed to feel like you belonged here. I already do, she said, then added, but I appreciate the gesture. Tristan opened a cabinet, pulling down 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. I didn't want tonight to be part of the performance. I've spent too long in rooms where every word is calculated. You're the only person who never makes me rehearse. You're rehearsing now. He poured the drinks and handed her one. You're right. Elara took the glass but didn't drink. What happens after tonight, Tristan? Once your mother gets wind of this, once your board starts talking, I've already made them talk. He lowered his voice. I gave a statement earlier today about stepping back from the company temporarily. Her head snapped up. You what? I need to figure out if I'm living the life I want or the life that was lined up for me before I ever had a say. She set her glass down, untouched. And what does that have to do with me? Everything. He walked to the window, the city lights casting a faint glow across his face. You made me realize I've never chosen anything for myself. Not the way I wanted. Not until I walked into that shop and you looked at me like I wasn't made of headlines and balance sheets. Elara folded her arms, unsure whether to be flattered or terrified. So you're blowing up your life for me, he corrected. But yes, because of you. She stepped beside him, her voice softer. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. That's what makes it real. They stood there, watching the city move beneath them until the silence wrapped too tightly around them. I should go, she said finally. He turned toward her. Or you could stay. Not because I want something from you. Just because I don't want a night to end. She hesitated, then slowly nodded. Later, she sat cross-legged on his couch in one of the boutique's soft cotton shirts, sketchbook in her lap. He watched from across the room, something unspoken flickering behind his eyes. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked, voice low. Elara didn't look up. Someone who's still learning how to stop apologizing for his own shadow. He let out a breath. "You're not easy to lie to. You're not used to being seen." They stayed up until the sky began to warm with early light. Between them, the sketchbook lay open. A half-finished drawing of the rooftop garden he'd shown her, but reimagined wild, imperfect, alive. That morning, she left without waking him. She needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out whether what they'd found was real or just a moment suspended in luxury and moonlight. The answer came 3 days later when she opened the shop and found a small canvas propped on the counter. It was one of her sketches copied and painted by hand. Rough around the edges but unmistakably hers. Beneath it, a note written in blocky, uneven letters. "You saw me. Now let me see you." She stared at it for a long time before picking up the phone and calling the number he'd scribbled at the bottom. When he answered, she said, "If you ever try to paint again, I'm charging for lessons." He laughed, and she felt it in her chest. They met that night in a quiet corner of a bookstore cafe, away from the noise of both their worlds. No suits, no gowns, just two people trying to figure out how to make room for each other. "I'm not a prize you win for walking away from your company," she said as they shared a plate of pastries. "I don't want a prize," he said. "I want a partner." Elara reached for his hand beneath the table. "Then stop waiting for the perfect version of your life to begin. You're already in it." 2 weeks later, Tristan invited her to the rooftop, the real one. It wasn't finished, yet the planters were still being installed and the lights hadn't been strung. But when she stepped out of the elevator, she found him standing beside an easel. On it, a large canvas covered in a single word painted in her handwriting. "Grow." She touched it gently. "You remembered." "I remembered everything." He turned to her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I didn't expect a misdelivered package to change my life, but it did. You did." Her breath hitched. He opened the box to reveal a thin gold band, simple and radiant. "I'm not asking for forever yet. I'm asking for now, for real, for us." She stepped closer, eyes bright. "If I say yes, you're going to have to learn how to share the bathroom sink." "I've already cleared a drawer." Elara laughed, then nodded. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and the city stretched out beneath them like a promise. They stayed there for hours, tangled in each other's arms with nothing around them but unfinished gardens and open sky. And for the first time in either of their lives, it felt like everything finally was in the right place. The wedding took place on a windswept terrace overlooking the Amalfi coast, where the sea stretched out in endless blue and the cliffs dropped into a cradle of lemon trees and wild rosemary. It wasn't a society event. There were no headlines, no photographers, just a handful of people who mattered: a painter from Elara's neighborhood, Tristan's childhood driver who now ran a vineyard, and her roommate who cried through the entire ceremony. Elara wore a dress with sleeves that reminded her of brushstrokes, soft, fluid, and unfinished in the most deliberate way. Her hair was pinned with olive branches, and her vows, written in her sketchbook, made Tristan's hands tremble as he held hers. "I never expected this," she whispered as the officiant stepped back and the guests applauded. "I didn't know how to want something until I met you," he replied, brushing his lips against her forehead before kissing her properly, with both hands cradling her face like she was the first thing he'd ever held gently. They didn't throw rice. Elara hated waste. Instead, the guests released tiny paper boats into the sea from the edge of the terrace. Each carried a wish written in pencil. That night, they returned to a villa tucked deep in the hills, where the wind rustled the grapevines and the stars felt closer than they ever had in the city. Inside, the fireplace crackled quietly, and the windows were thrown open to let the scent of lavender and salt drift in. Tristan poured wine into mismatched clay cups. "When this is over, where do you want to go?" She sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching the curve of his jaw as he leaned against a wall. "I don't want to go anywhere, not even Santorini. I want to build something here, in the real world. Not just visit it. He set the cup down and crossed to her. Then let's stay, let's make this our center. You'd leave New York. I already did. She looked up, startled. You told me it was temporary. I thought it would be. But then I stopped missing it. She reached for him, her fingers curling around the collar of his shirt. You're serious. I registered a foundation in Amalfi this week, he said. For young artists, no tuition, no gatekeeping, just space to create. Her breath caught. You did that for me. I did it because I believe in what you showed me. That creativity doesn't need permission, and that money should never be the gate that locks it away. He kissed her then, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. They spent the next month in Italy. Some days were quiet, filled with oil paints and sun-warmed tomatoes from the market. Others were filled with meetings between Tristan and local advisors, drafting plans for a permanent campus where students could live and study without debt. Elara taught a free class in the town square every Saturday. Children brought charcoal and scraps of paper, and she taught them how to see the world in shapes and shadows. Tristan often sat on the edge of the fountain, watching her with arms crossed and eyes soft. One afternoon, as they walked through a grove of fig trees, she asked, "Do you miss the power?" He slid his fingers through hers. "No, it was always borrowed anyway, and now I feel like I'm finally making something that lasts." She stopped walking. "I want to open a gallery. One where the walls are never blank, where the artists hang their work even if no one buys it." "Let's do it," he said. "We'll call it Parcel for where it all started," she laughed. "Only if we hang your painting," he winced. "You want people to see that?" "I want them to see how far you've come." By the end of the year, they'd signed the lease on a small stone building with sun-bleached shutters and a crooked bell near the door. The gallery opened with a line of children's drawings along the back wall, and one of Elara's originals above the entrance, the rooftop sketch, now complete, with a pair of figures standing at its center. They grew together in that town. No longer caught between two lives, but building one that was wholly theirs. The garden on their roof bloomed with lavender and wild fennel. The locals brought them cuttings, and in return, Tristan offered business classes in the evenings. They didn't speak of the life they left. Not because it hurt, but because it had served its purpose. On the first anniversary of their wedding, they hiked to the top of a nearby hill where the ruins of an old monastery overlooked the sea. Elara unpacked a picnic basket while Tristan unfolded a canvas and set up an easel. "You're painting again?" she asked, amused. "I've decided I'm brave now." She leaned back on her elbows and smiled. "What are you painting?" He glanced at her, then at the view. "You," she rolled her eyes. "Of course you are." "No," he said, dipping the brush in ochre. "Not how you look. How you make things look." That night, they fell asleep with the windows open, the breeze carrying the sound of distant church bells and the hum of cicadas. And in the quiet, with her head on his chest and his arm wrapped around her waist, Tristan whispered, "You were never just the girl at the counter." Elara sighed contentedly. "And you were never just the man in the suit." They drifted off like that, wrapped in linen sheets and certainty. Just before dawn, the sky turned the color of ripe peaches, and the first light poured through the window, spilling across the sketchbook she'd left open on the bedside table. Inside was a new drawing, 2 chairs, 1 rooftop, and a single line beneath it, "Home."